Not only has Big Pharma been exposed for deceiving members of Congress and state governors, but it has also implicated well-known manufacturers of the COVID-19 vaccine. The story of the lie's propagation and its propagators reveals a lot about the ways in which a profit-driven industry that prioritizes the needs of its investors is swaying the international dialogue regarding humanity's capacity to withstand the pandemic. The falsehood concerns South Africa and India's October 2020 WTO proposal to suspend major patent regulations. This proposal aims to spread cheaper, generic COVID-19 medications and vaccinations. The proposal, called a TRIPS waiver, references the WTO agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. Even though only 1 in 21 people in developing countries have received all recommended vaccinations, Pfizer and Moderna fiercely opposed the proposed legislation, which is still on the table more than a year later, to maximize their current and future profits. Since the pharmaceutical industry helped create the WTO's intellectual property regulations to protect pharmaceutical monopolies and profits, it would oppose such a proposal. The pharmaceutical industry had to portray businesses as human-driven to comply with intellectual property laws and protect its reputation. These goals included protecting research and innovation and ensuring ethical and safe vaccine production. Discussing how intellectual property encourages creativity and rewards life-saving efforts raises this important issue. Sharing vaccine recipes is not a panacea because much of the world, especially the Global South, lacks the infrastructure and capacity to produce vaccines safely and quickly. Repealing intellectual property laws would not increase global vaccine supply in the short term. Pfizer and Moderna, 2 mRNA vaccine manufacturers, have warned against the difficult and time-consuming process of developing mRNA vaccine production capacity. No global mRNA production capacity is idle. In May, Moderna CEO Stéphane Bancel said, "You cannot go hire people who know how to make mRNA. Those people don't exist." This tech is new. In March, Pharma reported that only a few facilities in the world perform some of the critical steps needed to manufacture mRNA vaccines. Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are members. Corporations appear to be gently educating well-meaning activists who are unaware of the vaccine production process with their expert knowledge and clever wording. It perpetuates racist assumptions that the Global South cannot produce high-quality pharmaceuticals on its own and must rely on its more developed former colonizers. As it happens, though, empirical claims can be empirically refuted. The New York Times published an article on October 22nd titled, "Here's Why Developing Countries Can Make mRNA COVID Vaccines," which highlighted 10 different facilities in Brazil, Thailand, South Africa, Argentina, Indonesia, and India as potential locations for producing mRNA vaccines. Key criteria include existing facilities, human capital, the regulatory system for medicines, and the political and economic climate, writes journalist Stephanie Nolan. Some of the facilities are already producing other vaccines, testing, or producing mRNA vaccines on their own. Put another way, the Global South could easily start producing Pfizer and Moderna vaccines if the pharmaceutical companies would just tell them how. The countries that host these industries are not especially shocked by this, of course. The WTO proposal was ultimately put forth by the pharmaceutical industries of South Africa and India last autumn, and over 100 countries have since endorsed it. Long before the New York Times story was released, in May, Indonesia's health minister, Budi Gunadi Sadikin, said the country could upscale our vaccine productions to meet regional and global demand at a World Health Organization event. Still, the New York Times' inquiry should have come as a shocking wake-up call to those who regard the newspaper more highly than Global South health ministers. One well-known argument against the unfettered distribution of vaccine formulas was based on a falsehood. This has a significant impact on a world where vaccine disparities are showing up on an incredible scale. Just 77 million people, or 6% of Africa's total population, have received all recommended vaccinations. Before the latest G20 meeting, the World Health Organization warned that, in contrast, over 70% of high-income countries had already vaccinated over 40% of their population. What if our essentially unfair vaccine distribution system, which grants private corporations monopoly power over vaccine distribution, is the cause of millions of preventable deaths? This horrifying reality could be a warning. What if it is a sign that vaccine patents, which were first made possible by public funding and research, should be shared so that more people can obtain them? This is precisely the opposite of what the pharmaceutical industry is against. There isn't any concrete proof that a group of pharmaceutical executives met in a room and made the decision to mislead the public about the amount of vaccines that could be produced worldwide. But there have been enough scientists, activists, and heads of state pointing out holes in Big Pharma's narrative that, at the very least, it is highly likely that the industry was aware of challenges to the veracity of its claims. Ignoring them was also in its best interest. The industry has surprisingly shown that it would rather build its own facilities from the ground up, like the BioNTech facilities in Senegal and Rwanda, which won't even start construction until mid-2022, than give the Global South countries the tools they need to produce vaccines independently. The idea that the system of privately held pharmaceutical monopolies is running smoothly is not just being promoted by Big Pharma. The Biden administration has not yet endorsed the proposal from South Africa and India, despite announcing in May that it would reverse the Trump administration's stance of opposing a patent waiver at the World Trade Organization. It is unclear what particular kind of patent waiver it supports. Meanwhile, congressional opponents of the TRIPS waiver are repeating talking points about a lack of manufacturing capacity that have been disproven. Among them are Democratic legislators such as Sen. Chris Coons, D-Del, who is well known for sharing a close bond with President Biden. In April, Coons opened an event hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The pharmaceutical industry provides financial support to the think tank. According to Coons, a state representative who receives substantial funding from the pharmaceutical industry and is heavily involved in the industry, "I don't think that waiving intellectual property rights will enable other countries to suddenly ramp up the manufacturing of complex vaccines." Before Biden's May announcement at the WTO, two Democratic representatives, Scott Peters of California and Ron Kind of Wisconsin, who were among the top 25 recipients of funding from Big Pharma PACs during the 2020 election cycle, stated in an open letter that a patent waiver risks the successes seen to date and provides little to no opportunity for further expansion of vaccines. Naturally, this false talking point has also been widely embraced by the Republican side. Senator Mike Crapo, R. Idaho, the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, has drawn criticism for accepting sizable contributions from the pharmaceutical industry. In May, Crapo responded to the Biden administration's WTO policy reversal of Trump's by saying, "Today's announcement that the administration supports waiving the WTO TRIPS agreement will not accelerate vaccinations. This is because granting the intellectual property rights to America's innovators, who received funding from American taxpayers, won't allow for the creation of new manufacturing capabilities in time to stop the pandemic. At the very least, these congressmen should be investigated for engaging in the trafficking of false statements." They should be made to explain why their claims and the reality differ, and they should be read the list of all the Global South organizations that are capable of producing mRNA vaccines. But this kind of responsibility would have to extend well beyond the borders of Washington. Wealthy and powerful nations like the United States and Germany have disproportionate influence at the World Trade Organization, WTO. Despite the fact that the organization's 164 members must reach a consensus before acting. This is because discussions and negotiations often take place behind closed doors. The countries opposed to the TRIPS waiver include the European Union, the United Kingdom, Norway, and Switzerland. The proposal has faced opposition in recent months, primarily from Angela Merkel, the outgoing German Chancellor and de facto head of the European Union. Additionally, she has promoted false talking points distributed by the pharmaceutical industry. The day after Biden declared he would no longer block a patent waiver, on May 6th, Merkel declared that manufacturing capacities and high-quality standards, not the patents, are the limiting factor for the production of vaccines. On May 8th, 3 days after Biden made his announcement, French President Emmanuel Macron played down the importance of a patent waiver. The claim that intellectual property is currently given top priority is untrue. We'd be lying to ourselves, he said. Production is the reason. In June, Macron would clarify that he is in favor of a TRIPS waiver. But more lives are lost every day, week and month that goes by without vaccinations being given out. One of the most crucial problems to solve is undoubtedly how to get vaccinations into as many arms as possible as soon as possible. But those with too much power to determine how this distribution happens have been exposed for spreading false information about the Global South's manufacturing superiority. The fact that so many powerful people have fallen for this lie should be viewed as a serious international scandal, and those responsible for this kind of trafficking should be held accountable for their egregious mistakes. It should also call into question many of Big Pharma's other assertions, including those that vaccine research from China and Russia is being pirated and thefted, that innovation cannot occur without intellectual property rights, and that private companies, accountable only to their shareholders, are the best stewards of such an important and life-saving medication.